I really want you to pay attention to this lesson. It's very important that you understand this lesson because it helps us with our writing. Now we're going to really focus on active and passive voice, but we're going to start out with transitive and intransitive verbs because they all tie together. And if you understanding this, you will be a better writer. Now we're going to start off with intransitive verbs. We're going to understand what an intransitive verb is. So let's break it apart. Now, in means not or into. So in this word, we're going to say it means not. And trans means across. So most of the time when you see trans, it is a prefix. But in this word, it is really a main part of the word. And that means not transferring. You're not putting things across to something else. So, intransitive means not putting across. So we're going to use intransitive verbs. Now, an intransitive verb, they need two things. It needs a subject and a verb. That's what the two main things are that you need to make up to say, I'm intransitive, is a subject and a verb. They take prepositional phrases, dependent clauses, adverbs, infinitives, to provide more detail. That's what you use. We do not use direct objects in intransitive verbs. So if we use a direct object in an intransitive verb, it becomes transitive, and it is no longer intransitive. Has everything to do with a direct object, transferring that action into the direct object. That's what it has to do with. Okay, so are you understanding what an intransitive verb is? This is a verb that does not have a direct object. That's all it is. Intransitive verbs do not have direct objects. Okay, but it has to have these other things for more detail. You have to have them or you're not going to understand. So you still need these things. Now let's talk about active voice. Active voice has everything to do with your tenses. They are affected by your tenses. And if you're not understanding your tenses, and we have gone over 9 of the tenses, 6 of them really well, and we will go into more tenses, but if you're not understanding your tenses, you're going to be affected. You're not going to understand what you need to be doing to keep you in active voice or keep you in passive voice, whichever one you want to be in. Now, it's really important that you understand the difference because active voice, it is more understandable. And we really should be writing as much as our work in active voice. I would say 80% of the work out there is done in active voice or should be done in active voice. It's because it's more clear. Sentences are more concise. You can understand them better if you are in active voice. They're more concise. No subject is as strong in a relationship as the active voice is in a sentence. So that's why it's so important that you understand the difference. If you want to write in a really strong voice, you want to choose active. Now there's a complete place for passive voice. Oftentimes it's in science, but there is a total place for active voice, and you have to choose if you want to write active or passive. Now let's look at the difference here. I have some examples. The chest holds the nativities. Now I am putting a picture up so you can actually see what I'm talking about. Now, the chest holds the nativities. Now, in an active voice, the subject is doing the holds, okay? The chest is the one holding. That's what active voice does. And then it has the direct object right there. So, see, you have your subject, your verb, and your direct object. What kind of verb is this?
Transitive.
It's a transitive verb because it has a direct object. The legs, which I took off the pedestal table, hold up the chest. Now, the legs are holding. They're doing it. That means you're in active voice. The legs are doing it. Now, I took off the pedestal table. I am the one that took. So this is an active voice. We have our subject, our verb, and our direct object. Subject, verb, direct object. Subject, verb, direct object. All right, so we're going to go over this part again. Active voice, we have lots of tenses. Sentences are more concise in our active voice. No subject is as strong in a relationship as the active voice in a sentence. They are the strongest sentence to write in active voice. That's why so many people write in active voice and not passive voice. So here's an example. The chest holds the nativities. Now, right here, see how the chest is doing the verb. The chest is doing the action. The chest is doing the action of the verb. Now, right here we have a direct object, and it's receiving the action of the verb. So it's doing the action of the verb, and this action is going to the direct object in this sentence. So now with remembering that, let's go into passive voice. Now, passive voice, we focus on our be verbs. Now, your passive voice has to have be verbs. Now, the present, that's am, are, and is. Your past is was and were, and your past participle is been. Also, what passive voice takes are prepositional phrases. Now, by the, and then here is the object of the preposition. That's where your noun or your pronoun goes. And oftentimes you're going to use the preposition by in passive voice. Not always. So now the prepositional phrase, it comes after the verb. Like right here, the nativities were held on the chest. Here's your verb, and here is your prepositional phrase. The action is being done to the subject, not the subject doing the action. Here, the subject is doing the action. But here, right here, the action is being done to the subject. The chest was held up by the legs of the pedestal table. The action is being done to the subject. The nativities were displayed on the chest. The action is being done to the subject. That's the difference. The action is being done to the subject, not the subject doing the action. Subject is doing the action. The action is being done to the subject. The nativities were held on the chest. So look right here. Paul, switch this into active voice.
The chest held the nativities.
The chest held the nativities. See how you can switch that? Chest was held up by the legs of the pedestal table. Daniel, switch that into active voice.
The legs of the pedestal table held up the chest.
Nice, good. So the legs of the pedestal table held up the chest. So you're going to take the word that is in the object of the preposition that follows the verb. You're going to take that word and put it as the subject, and then you're going to take the subject and put it in the direct object position. You're going to take the subject and put it in the direct object position. Does that make sense? Okay, Paul, change that. The nativities were displayed on the chest.
The chest displayed the nativity.
Right. Going to take the word that is in the prepositional phrase that follows the verb, put it in the subject, put the subject as the direct object. Okay? So now, let's talk about our intransitive verbs. Now, intransitive verbs, they do not take direct objects. Only the subject of the verb is doing the action in an intransitive verb. Let's read that again. Only the subject of the verb is doing the action. Only the subject of the verb is doing the action in an intransitive verb. So, active voice means it's intransitive. So can they work together? Can active voice and intransitive, can they work together?
Yeah.
Yes. So if you think intransitive and active voice can be an intransitive verb. Because look, intransitive verbs, only the subject of the verb is doing the action. Only the subject. That's what happens in active voice. The chest holds. Okay? So, if you can remember that only intransitive verbs fit into active voice, that's going to help you. So intransitive verbs, they never take a direct object, ever. They never take a direct object. Do intransitive verbs ever take a direct object? No, they do not. Transitive verbs take direct objects. Intransitive verbs do not take direct objects. Intransitive verbs will only fit in active voice. So maybe you should study some of your transitive and intransitive verbs. No. So now you know that some words can be transitive or intransitive. Some words can only be transitive and some words can only be intransitive. So that's going to help you to understand how to do active voice. So if it doesn't take a direct object, you know you can only make the subject of the verb to do the action. You can only do that in an intransitive verb. You can only make it fit in active voice with an intransitive verb. Now, look at this one. I was forced to replace the old wood-burning stove. Well, what's the verb doing? What is the subject receiving the action or is it doing the action?
It's receiving.
You're right. The subject is receiving the action. I was the one being forced, right? I'm the one being forced. We know that this is going to be in passive voice. Use passive voice, where's our direct object?
It's in the subject.
Let me just go into this first. I was forced to replace the old wood-burning stove. Where is our prepositional phrase? Who forced me to do it? Now, you don't have to have it in there. If it makes sense, it can be dropped. Somebody forced you to do it, but it doesn't have to be said in this sentence unless somebody needs to know, well, who forced me to make me replace the old wood-burning stove that I had in my house? Who forced me? Well, if somebody has to know, you can say, I was forced by the inspector to replace the old wood-burning stove. Now, so for you to be able to put that in active voice, you have to have who's the one that forced you. You have to have that. So who's the one that forced you? Paul, change this into active voice. You have to take the object of the preposition that is sitting in the prepositional phrase that follows the verb. You've got to take that, put it in your subject.
Ooh.
But it's not in here, but I just told you what it was. It was by the inspector. Oh, nice. The inspector forced me. Now we're changing I to me because me can't fit. You have to change that because you have to use the proper pronouns. The inspector forced me to replace the old wood-burning stove. Now it's in active voice because the inspector is doing the forcing. And now you have a direct object, me. Now, why do we care to understand transitive and intransitive verbs? If you understand the difference between a transitive and intransitive verb, you are going to be able to put your sentences in active and passive voice easier. Now, transitive verbs, they can go in active or passive. Intransitive verbs can only be in active voice. Now, when we say transitive verbs, well, they have direct objects. Right? Well, transitive verbs, they have our direct objects. Transitive verbs have direct objects, right? And intransitive verbs, no direct objects. So, but look at this. Well, if only transitive verbs fit in passive voice, where is our direct object in here? That's what confuses people. Where is our direct object? It's in the subject. This is the direct object, the nativities. So the direct object is receiving the action of the verb. So in passive voice, you need to remember, in passive voice, the subject is doing that. The subject is receiving the action of the verb. The subject is receiving the action of the verb. The subject is receiving the action of the verb. The subject is receiving the action of the verb. But if you want to put that in active voice, it has to have a transitive, you have to be using a transitive verb. You have to be taking the direct object that you're going to use in that sentence and put it in the subject. And then your subject is going to go into the prepositional phrase that follows it. Okay, are you guys seeing that?
Yes.
So you're going to take the direct object that's in active voice in your transitive verb. You're going to take the direct object that is the transitive verb is doing. It's transferring that into the noun or pronoun. And you're going to take that and put it in the subject. And then your subject is going to go in the prepositional phrase after the verb. Okay, so that's how that works. So that's the reason why you have to have a transitive verb that has a direct object sitting in the passive voice. Even though you can't see it, it's there because it's in the subject. It's in the subject. And that's what you do with transitive verbs. So that's the reason why it's so important for you to understand transitive verbs, intransitive verbs. This is very confusing, and a lot of people do not understand how to write in active voice and how to write in passive voice, and they're not connecting it truly with transitive and intransitive verbs. So now let's talk about that again. Transitive verbs go in active and passive voice, right? Where do transitive verbs go?
In active and passive.
Active and passive. And intransitive verbs can be active. Intransitive verbs can only be in active because intransitive verbs do not take a direct object. For you to be in passive voice, you have to have a transitive verb that takes a direct object. That direct object is going to be your subject. And the subject that you would typically put would be following in the object of the preposition in the prepositional phrase that follows the verb. All right, that's it. Now, also what passive voice does, they use prepositional phrases. And one of the main prepositional phrases that it uses is by the, and then you use your object of the preposition. So, but it doesn't have to just be by the, but oftentimes you want to use by the because it explains things better. Or you use other prepositional phrases or prepositional phrases after the verb. It's going to come right after the verb. Yes, sweetie?
Like by the shed?
Yeah, by the shed. Now, the action is being done to the subject, not the subject doing the action. I'm going to read that again. The action is being done to the subject, not the subject doing the action. Look at this on the chest. The chest, if you want it to be active voice, the word that is in the object of the preposition in the prepositional phrase is the subject that you would use if you're going to be an active voice. So if you wanted this to be an active voice, you need to say, the chest held the nativities. Do you see that?
I thought you wanted all the words. So.
No, you don't have to. That's the whole point. So Daniel's like, well, I thought you wanted the whole words, but the whole point is you use a lot less words when you talk active. That's why it's less confusing, is because you're using less words. And so, do you see the difference? So if you're going to want to put this in active voice, you look at your prepositional phrase that's following your verb, and you use this as the subject. And then the chest is the one that held the nativities. It's the one doing the action, not the one receiving the action. Now let's look at this one. The chest was held up by the legs of the pedestal table. Now, this is in passive voice. See, we have our subject and our verb. If you put it in active, then you will have your subject right here. So how are you going to put this in active voice?
No legs held in the chest up.
Nice. case. The legs held the chest up. You would have to change up your wording, but that's the whole point, is you change up your wording to put it in active, use less words, and it makes more sense. The nativities were displayed on the chest. So now this is in passive voice. Were displayed right here. Are the nativities displayed? They're not. They're the ones being displayed. So you have this in passive voice because it is right here. The action is being done to the subject, not the subject doing the action. Yeah.
I got another one for the chest was held up by the legs of the pedal.
Okay, so what is it?
So the legs of the pedestal table was held up by the chest. Oh wait, no. Dang it.
So that's where you have to be really careful. So if it's answering the question, then you know. I love that you're correlating that in your mind. So this is the key, Paul, how you would actually do that. Look at this prepositional phrase. Make sure you're using this as the subject. If you want to say, I really want this in active voice, look at this prepositional phrase, because this should be your subject if you want it in active voice. And you should, and then it would say, the chest displayed the nativities. Do you see the difference? Write down, completely clear, and you have it. So Paul, right here, put that in active voice. Put it in active voice.
On the chest, the nativities were displayed.
Nope, you just want to use this as this. You still didn't do it right. So say that again.
What I just did?
Yeah.
On the chest, the nativities were displayed.
So look, you're still using on the chest is describing displayed. You just put it in the front. You didn't move it around. You need to make this your subject. You have to make this agree with your verb. So the chest displayed the nativities. So you have to take it out of its prepositional phrase to make it work. Do you see that?
Mm-hmm. I feel like you just get rid of on.
Yeah, you don't have to use this.
Move it.
Yeah, because this right here, if you just moved it on the chest, the nativities were displayed, it's still describing were displayed.
The chest.
So it's still sitting in past, even if you started it with on the chest. Yeah, so you take out was or were out of that. And I put everything in this lesson in simple tense. So it's really easy to understand. I didn't put it in. Now this puts us in a different tense right here, which we really haven't discussed, so I'm not going to go into that. But still, most of the stuff right here, active voice, I'm putting in your simple tense. And so simple tense is the simplest to understand. Now, let's talk about intransitive verbs again. No direct object. That's what you need to remember. No direct objects. Only the subject of the verb is doing the action. So, intransitive verbs do not take direct objects. Now, listen, look at this. Can the active voice and intransitive verbs, can they work together? That's a question. What is a transitive verb?
It's a verb with a direct object.
Exactly. What's an intransitive verb?
Without a direct object.
It does not take a direct object. Exactly. So, 3 things are needed to make up a transitive verb. You have the subject plus your transitive verb plus your direct object. 1, 2, 3. Here's the diagram. You have your simple subject, your transitive verb, and then your direct object. But then we have our indirect object, but I didn't put it on the main line. See, it's not on the main line because if you don't have a direct object, you cannot have an indirect object. Plain and simple. You can't, if this doesn't exist, this doesn't exist. So a lot of people I've seen say you need an object to have a transitive verb. But that's, yeah. But then you have your direct object. So no matter what, you have to have a direct object to have a transitive verb. So it is the second member right here of this. Now the direct object is actually receiving the action of the verb. Okay? So if I said, I kicked the ball. So the direct object is actually receiving the action of the verb. Kicked, so if you see me kicking the ball is receiving the action. right? So I is the subject, kicked is the verb. I kicked right? I kicked is your verb, and this is the ball right here. It's receiving this, okay? So how can I move this? So this is doing the action. It's receiving the action of this. This verb is receiving the action of this. This is in active voice. So put it in passive voice. Start with the ball because you want to start with your direct object. The ball was kicked by me. I like that because you're using by. The prepositional phrase by. Nice. That's how you do it. Make known an intransitive verb, no direct object. Does not, no way, none, zero, nada, direct object. Do intransitive verbs take direct objects?
No.
No. I left active and passive voice and changed this just so we can see them. Does not, no matter whether the intransitive verb is dynamic or stative verbs. So the be verbs matter, but if you are sitting in a dynamic or a stative verb, it doesn't matter. They can be intransitive verbs. Because stative verbs can take direct objects, right? Even though they're a state of being verb, they can take direct objects. It's your be verbs that matter. So an intransitive verbs do not require direct object. You need to have this solid in your mind. A transitive verb have direct objects. Now, all sentences with action verbs, that's talking about your dynamic or stative, have either transitive or intransitive verbs. So there's the word transit. And this word leads people to get confused about transitive and intransitive. It leads people to assume and believe transitive and intransitive verbs are just action verbs. They just assume that it's just action verbs, but they can be stative verbs, okay? Or your dynamic verbs. So when I say action verbs here, I'm talking about the dynamic and stative verbs, okay? So all sentences with these dynamic and stative verbs, with the action verbs, have either transitive or intransitive verbs. They lead people, but there's a main word that confuses people, and that's transit. And it's different than here, but it makes people assume that it's only about action, when you can have it with your stative verbs. All right, intransitive verbs, no direct objects. Can you see how big that is? No direct object. So please, you guys, try to understand your transitive and intransitive verbs. And if you do, then you're going to understand your active and passive voice so much better until you get into crazy English stuff. But this is, I feel, a high school level that should be taught in high school, even though it's above a lot of people that ever received it in high school. Now remember, intransitive verbs, that mean not transitive verbs, you can understand without direct objects. That means intransitive verbs, do they have direct objects?
No.
Yeah, because you can understand them without them. No direct objects. You can use some verbs both ways though. Why is this so important that you understand transitive and intransitive verbs? So you can understand your voice. We want to understand our active and our passive voice. Now let's really focus on transitive verbs. Transitive verbs have direct objects, right? Objects are needed to make sense of the sentence. So when you have a transitive verb, you need to have a direct object because it makes sense. It helps you understand. The action is given to the object. The object receives the action. Okay? So you are giving that action from the verb to the object, and then the object receives it. So this direct object stands out. The object stands out, and it makes more sense when you have an object. So with that in mind, Transitive verbs, they give up something. They waive something to give to their direct object. They sacrifice something to give to the direct object. All of these words you can think of, they relinquish something from themselves to give to the direct object. All right, here's a quiz. Do transitive verbs have direct objects?
Yes.
Yes, they do. Do intransitive verbs have direct objects?
No.
No. Now these are the basics to help you understand how to stay in active and passive voice. When you get further along in your education, things will change up a little bit, but this is where you need to start. It is so important. So your subject is doing the verb. The chest holds. And then it has, what's it holding? Then you have your direct object. The chest holds the nativities. But here, the action right here is being done to the subject. Okay? And then you have your prepositional phrase right here in the object of the preposition, that if you want to change it to active voice, you use this word to change it to active voice. And that's where you find it. All right, that's it for this lesson. That's it for part 1. And we will see you in the next one, part 2. Bye, everybody.
Thanks for watching. Bye.